Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And Saruta, who I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with her in a program that she's in to get people in private industry like you to understand what we do in government. And I'll tell you a little bit about that and my background and how it influenced me after 20 years in the private sector to actually jump into the public sector, which is something I hope all of you will think about at some point in your life. But I do want to talk a little bit about women, and thanks for the men who are here. You can go home and tell your wives or your partners that you listened to a woman today, and reflect upon some of the things that I'm going to talk about, because things still haven't changed a lot, although they have changed somewhat in my lifetime. And, you know, like all of us, and thank you for being here as women leaders and people who work in DISH. I've been told how I should act. I've been told what I should wear. I've been told what I should do professionally in my life. My father said, I'll pay for college, but you need a profession when you come out, so you need to be a teacher or you need to be a nurse. And while those are great professions for many people, I had much higher aspirations. I didn't know I would be a lieutenant governor, but I knew I wanted to do something that was not direct care, not hands-on, but that maybe was leading. Not sure I knew what leading was at that time, but I knew that I was pretty fearless. And in thinking about that, I knew I wanted to try to set examples and lead people. When I was in high school, and I was a jock, I still am a jock, and I'm proud to say that, I played basketball, and you may not know this, but when I was in high school, and I always remind my kids, it's not that long ago, women could only play on half of the court. So, you know, we weren't strong enough to run up and down the full court. We wore a dress. Literally wore a dress that almost looks like what I have on now. And there was one player that was allowed to run the full court, but she had to get pulled like 10 times during a game because we just weren't strong enough to be able to have that kind of endurance, which just infuriated me. As I was growing up, Title IX, which many of you women know, created greater equality in many areas, but particularly in sports. I went to college before Title IX was introduced, and there was no money. If you were a woman athlete, you had to make that tough decision of going and not having any supplement to your tuition in order to go to school. One thing I did about 5 years ago was I endowed the college that I went to, and I created a scholarship for women athletes who played field hockey. That was my sport of choice. And so there is a scholarship now for women who oftentimes, as you know, if you can't afford to go to college and you don't have a scholarship, you need to work part-time. And that was one of the things that I struggled with and ended up having to stop playing field hockey, my sport of choice, because working and going to school and playing a sport wasn't going to work. And you may know that extended in a lot of the sort of quasi-professional areas. Women couldn't run marathons. In fact, the first time a woman ran in the Olympics in a marathon was in 1984, really not that long ago. So I'll turn from my personal experience, and for me that was a big motivator. I didn't quite understand, how come I have to wear a dress when I play sports? How come I have to stand, at a particular place? I couldn't play certain sports that I wanted to play in. And I've been a big supporter of women in athletics, partly because it also teaches women skills that they're often not taught. And maybe they wait until they get into corporate life to learn about. And that's teamwork and the importance of teamwork. So for me, sports was not only a way to just express a passion, but as I look back, it also taught me some really valuable lessons in leading and being part of a team, because it's not just about it is about the team. So I want to give you a sense of the landscape of government and business when it comes to women representation. So I am the 5th woman lieutenant governor in the state of Colorado, and there have been 49 lieutenant governors. At this moment, there has never been a woman governor for the state of Colorado. There has never been a woman senator for the state of Colorado. There has never been a woman mayor for the city of Denver. So we clearly have some either women not wanting to run for office, and I work with a group called Emerge Colorado, some of you may have heard of, that tries to encourage women to learn the skills that they need to run and to take the risks, because it is about risk taking, whether you're in government, whether you're in the private sector. And that is a theme that I want to emphasize with you. And when Governor Hickenlooper called me, so I was appointed, which is an unusual thing. Usually a governor and lieutenant governor run side by side, much like a president and a vice president. They're of the same party. And in this case, the former lieutenant governor resigned to take another job, and the governor had the opportunity to appoint somebody. And he had a concept, which I liked, but I also thought, boy, I would like to add some female diversity to his cabinet. And when he asked me, what he said was, I'd like you to serve as the chief operating officer for the state. And that is not a job that existed in the state before. Lieutenant governors are often about diversity. It could be geographic diversity, it could be other kinds of diversity. But when you think about tickets, like presidential tickets or even gubernatorial tickets, it is about balance oftentimes. And so he had a great opportunity, and he is, as you know, a former business person himself, to say government is kind of like a business. It's got a lot of people that work for us. We have a big P&L. The state budget for Colorado is $28.5 billion. If you plugged us into the Fortune 100, we would be 97th. So why not, as most corporations have a chairperson and a president, why not have a chief operating officer? And for me, that really resonated with me for a couple of reasons. My early career was in government. I spent 20 years in New York City. And part of what I believed in, my ideals were equity and also transparency and accountability in government. It's often maligned. People say, you work in government, and you often wonder what's the little bubble in their head saying. And it isn't always, wow, that's great. And part of, as I mentioned, the program that Sruta is in tries to explain why it is great. Not only is it a strong personal commitment to make some of the sacrifices that you have when you work in government. I always say low pay, little recognition, and believe it or not, long hours, particularly when you get to the top of organizations. So getting people to understand what we do, why we do it, what's motivating us, I think is part of our responsibility in government. So the governor said to me, would you like to do this? I want you to be the chief operating officer for the state. There had never been one. We have, just like you're organized in functions, HR, legal, sales and marketing, operations, the government looks like that. A little different because we don't sell things, but we have agriculture, we have public health, we have corrections, we have transportation. And if each one of those departments acted in their individual silos and there was no connector, then we oftentimes would not succeed, because issues that come to us don't just stay in one department. Oil and gas, take that as an example. That is a issue that our Natural Resources Department cares about. It's an issue that our Economic Development Department cares about, and it's an issue that our Public Health Department cares about. Marijuana is another one. Marijuana, it cuts across so many of our departments, from agriculture to public health, to revenue, that you need a connector. And so in many ways, I serve as the connector. I try to help prioritize what departments are focusing on and then pull together some of these big subject areas. But the other thing that I try to do is I try to drive performance. And so my career was 20 years in the public sector, 20 years in the private sector, and along comes Governor Hickenlooper. And I thought, this is a great opportunity for me to say I've learned a lot in the private sector, because in many organizations, as you know, you can motivate people by creating a mission, a vision, values, having a strategic plan, having a culture. And when I looked at the state, they didn't have those things. There is no strategic plan. We have a roadmap that cuts across a few areas, but you can imagine in government, we don't necessarily invest in people the way that companies like Dish would do. If you come to the state, you don't necessarily get new employee orientation that sets a tone for you about where are we going as an organization. So I embarked on creating a culture in Colorado for Colorado state government over the last year, which I didn't realize was going to be my job as chief operating officer. I thought someone was already doing that, but I realized if I'm going to drive performance and drive results, I first have to create the culture and the engagement around that. So that has been a lot of my job in the state, and hopefully you've heard about some of the things that we're trying to do to be more transparent. We have a website and we have a dashboard. So much like I'm sure you have internal key performance indicators, we have that for the state. And I meet regularly with the department heads to say, well, why are we off target? And some of our goals are very aspirational. Some of them are about the mechanics of how we deliver government services. You all go to the Department of Motor Vehicles. It happens to be my favorite department because it always gets a laugh when I talk about it. But when you think about it, it is the place where the largest number of citizens interact with the state. And there are ways that we can do that better. We can automate what we're doing. So for example, we now over the last year, 1 million people have renewed their driver's licenses online instead of doing what probably most of you do, which is you say, oh, it's lunchtime. I can run off, or it's Friday, right? Don't do it on a Friday. I'm going to run to the DMV, and you might be waiting in a line, and you may not have information. So there's a number of things that we've done to, we call it skip the trip. And that applies to a number of functions, so that the more the state automates what we do, the more it is convenient for you as a customer. So I look at all of you as customers of the state of Colorado, whether it's the DMV, it's paying your income taxes, it's getting a license or a permit. And hopefully you've begun to see some of those things change. What we've done is we've said to our department heads, each of you must have 4 to 5 key performance indicators and goals. And one of them has to be about customer service, and one of them has to be about technology, so that they're all starting to think about that. It is not just, we're here, we get paid, and the customer, is on the receiving end. This is, we want to delight our customers. We want to become more efficient, we want to become more effective, and we want to become more elegant. So that's what makes me tick in terms of my job. But I do have an ulterior motive, which is to be a female leader in state government and to continue to promote state government as a place that has equal representation for women. We have a cabinet, as I mentioned, those 18 departments with a variety of different functions. Half of our cabinet are women in the state. And we've begun some mentoring programs for women, again, to just feel like, hey, I can raise my hand, be part of a leadership team, and there's a pathway to do that. But as I mentioned, we still have issues in the United States and in Colorado around women representation. As I said, I was only the 5th female lieutenant governor. We have 6 female governors in the United States, and interestingly enough, 4 of them are Republicans and 2 of them are Democrats. Women on corporate boards is actually, we are poorly represented here in Colorado in publicly traded companies. Only 1 out of 10 people on the corporate boards are women. There is an initiative through the Colorado Women's Chamber that you may or may not know about that is to actually encourage and reward and recognize private companies that have and are working on bringing more women on board. When you look at the C-suite, you may know that about half of the women in America are in professional jobs, but only about 17% of them make it to the C-suite. And while we've seen some improvement, if that is our rate of change of getting women into the C-suite continues at the rate that we're on, in 100 years we'll be at parity. Probably not a good thing to wait 100 years for that to happen. And as you, successful women, and I know we've got some successful men in here too, I want to leave you with a couple of calls to action that I think are important keys to being successful, whether you're a man or a woman in any corporate or government environment. So the first, and I'll give you sort of the three things that I guess I've learned in my life that are important and I think were ingredients to me being successful. One is, interestingly enough, so I've been working for 41 years and I've used a resume twice in my life. I used a resume for my first job, and it didn't say very much other than I went to college and graduate school and I may have volunteered for something. And then I used a resume about 13 years ago when I moved from New York to come to work for Kaiser here in Colorado. And even that was a resume that was used to present to a group of people on a board and a CEO, but I had already been referred into the pipeline. So part of the thing that I would encourage all of you to do is to connect with people. Make sure that people know whether you're here at DISH or you in a leadership position or you're aspiring to a leadership position, that you have that aspiration. And one of the most powerful things for me was simply what I did outside of work. So I was pretty excited about volunteering, whether it was to work in a nonprofit organization or to be on a board. Ultimately, it's hard to take a jump from just never being on a board to being on a board. But the more that you identify with an organization that you might have a particular affinity for, you might like Habitat for the Humanity, for example, or you might like Planned Parenthood. Volunteer for those organizations, get to know the leadership, and then just ask the question. Be bold. Ask the question, how would I get on your board? Or ask your friends who might be on boards, because I found over my 41 years of working that the best way to not only get engaged in things outside of work is to participate in boards, but then oftentimes those boards might ask you to run their organization. That happened to me once. I was on a board and somebody said, the executive director's leaving, would you think about this? And I said, yes. The other way that I've gotten jobs is simply somebody noticed me, whether it was on a board or it was in my organization, and knew that what my values were, what my passion was, and what my commitment was. So I've had 12 jobs in 41 years and really used a resume maybe 1.5 of those times. And what's been rewarding for me is just the diversity of what I've done. I've done healthcare, I've done labor negotiations. Obviously, I'm in government now as a chief operating officer. And the thing that sort of makes me tick is just the opportunity to learn and take on new challenges. So I'll leave you with 3 messages in terms of what I think is important. First is to speak up. Speak up and be noticed. Speak up. I always say to my team, if I say I have this great idea and everybody sits and sort of nods, or they all say, that's a great idea, then I know something's wrong. Because not all my ideas are great. They may be what excites me. I have a new great idea, which is the state of Colorado doesn't have a housing department. So wouldn't you think that we would think about housing, because we have people moving here without the ability to find good housing and affordable housing. But then I encourage my team to say, so what's wrong with my idea? Well, we kind of do housing. Well, maybe other states don't do housing. So I encourage that kind of constructive dialogue, because the worst thing for me to do would be to go to the governor and say, hey, I got this great idea. I want to create a housing department. And he says, here's the 12 reasons why you shouldn't do it. So I challenge my team to challenge me and to help me think about those issues. Taking risks. That is I probably should have done that first. One of the things that I've always done, whether it's professionally or personally, is take risks. And it could be changing what you do in your current organization. So maybe you're in HR, but you really want to do operations, and raise your hand and ask somebody, could I make that move? It's part of my personal development. There's a great data point that you may have seen over in the last couple of months that men apply for jobs when they meet 60% of the criteria that's specified in a hiring notice. Women generally wait until they meet every single one of those requirements. So take the risk. You may not fit perfectly in a new job opportunity, but express why you think you have the motivation and the interest and the willingness to learn. I took some personal risks as well. I decided at the age of 54 to start climbing all the 14ers. As an East Coast person, I didn't even know what 14er meant until I came here, and then I said, I think I want to learn that. And I made a commitment to myself that I was going to climb every single one of them before I was 60, even though I was working and even though I was getting up in years, and took the necessary classes and met the right people and figured out how to do all of those things, even though some of them are a little bit daunting and a little bit scary. But I think about it as a lesson in terms of thinking about make the commitment. Sometimes if you say you're going to do something and you tell people, that's the best thing to do, because then it's really hard to walk it back. and I often do that. I'll do that with my team as well. We're going to create a housing department. I'm already down this road, and it's going to take a lot of persuasion to tell me we shouldn't do that. And the third thing is really about partly what you're here for, which is if your company has organizations that support learning from other women, mentoring other women, take the time to do that, and sponsor women. eBay doubled the number of women promoted to leadership roles in just a few years after every eBay vice president and senior vice president made a commitment to sponsor 5 women as their mentees. And I tell the story sometimes because now I say that, and I had 3 children, and I'm sure many of you have children, and you have parents that you're taking care of and other things in your life. And I'll never forget when a woman approached me, and all I could think of was my dry cleaning was in my trunk. I wasn't training to climb my 14er that I had coming up in 2 weeks. I had a pile of email, and a woman approached me at a meeting and said, would you mentor me? And my first reaction was the dry cleaning, the lack of training. I hadn't made my bed. I mean, all the things that we all think about that in a perfect world we would do. And I said to her, I said yes, even though the inside part of me was saying, oh no, one more thing to do. And it turned out that she, over a number of years, was somebody that I not only mentored, but ultimately hired. And now is responsible for making me successful and the governor successful, because she's really good at what she does. So you have not only the opportunity to have the personal satisfaction, but also it could work in terms of either your own career opportunities, both in or out of your organization. So just to sum up, make sure you speak up, be noticed, take risks, and bring others around, because you will have opportunities if you take that risk. I often say that if you don't take a risk, you won't know about what the upside is. You may also not know what the downside is, but the good news is we all seem to recover from the downside. Failure is a learning experience in and of itself. So whether it means accepting a transfer to another geography, changing your teams, these are all things that I would just highly encourage you to do. You can go back if you need to, if you really need to change your circumstances, but you'll never experience the upside of the opportunities if you don't simply take that risk. I want to leave you with a quote, and I think we have time for some questions. And one of my favorite quotes, believe it or not, Golda Meir, who was the Prime Minister of Israel and a woman, who became the Prime Minister of Israel in a time when there weren't a lot of women leaders as there are today across the world. And believe it or not, she grew up in Colorado. She said, create the kind of self that you will be happy to live with all your life. Make the most of yourself by fanning the tiny inner sparks of possibility into flames of achievement. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts, my history, and what I do for the state of Colorado, and happy to take any questions that you have. Thanks so much. Excuse me, can you repeat the question? No, that's a joke. No, that was a joke. Is it on my radar? So I will tell you, it is something that a number of people have urged me to do, both as a woman and as somebody. It is interesting when you've been in an organization like DISH, right? I said to somebody the other day who said, I don't know, what do you do? And I said, I get stuff done. Actually, I didn't use that S word. I used a different one. And that is what's running the state of Colorado is just like running a business. You've got to figure out what your revenue is, how do I spend it, what's effective. So I do think there is a unique skill in being a governor, and that is not being a politician necessarily, although we all deal in politics, right, in small p politics, but it is understanding that it is very much about driving performance. And so I feel good about what I've done over the last 13 months, and I've got another 18 months to do that work. And so it's something I honestly didn't think about 13 months ago, because I was just into getting this job done, working for a great governor. But I am being asked that question more and more, and I'm going to think about it over the next couple of months. Thank you. And I'd be a liar, because look, I just told you guys to take risks, right? One really big one is that taking risks element, and pushing your mentee to think outside of his or her sort of existing sphere. Because most people don't want to have a mentor simply because they want to stay in place. They want to change in some way. They want to get a promotion. They want to move into a new company, perhaps. So it is, and I think one struggle for me is it's hard to say to somebody, yeah, jump off of that diving board, go ahead, and not necessarily understand all of their personal circumstances, because I often say I take measured risks, I'm not just here to do the jump off the diving board. I'm going to make sure the water's in the pool and I know how to go down and everything else. So I think it's that balance between, it's easy for a mentor to say, go ahead and do it, and the mentee may have other issues that are preventing them from taking the risk. So it's listening, it's making sure that you assess all of that. I think it's also helping them. It's not just, let me tell you all the things that I've done and what I know, it's opening doors for them. So I mentored a number of women, and part of it is getting them on boards. I have benefited tremendously from, whether it's a school board in your community, it's a small nonprofit, because to me, on a board, you broaden your experience. If the only thing you know is transportation, then go get on a board that is thinking about the opioid crisis or is thinking about behavioral health and substance abuse, because you'll broaden what you know. You'll meet people who have different expertise. You'll learn about governance, and governance is really important because in a leadership role, you're not just managing things, you are learning how to govern, and there is a big difference, the difference between a manager and a leader. So I think it's spending the time to do all of those things with your mentee and really support them, and it requires quite a bit of work and networking for the mentor to do that work as well. Thank you for asking that. First is just to recognize I often say one of the biggest fears I think women have who speak out is being talked about because they speak out, is using the word that often rhymes with witch to describe someone. And I have been in situations where I think it's really important to speak your mind, and it's been taken as a challenge or insubordination, or even if it isn't articulated that way, I think there's something in women, we're conditioned to sort of go back and say, should I have walked that comment back a little bit? And I've talked to men about that, and most men are like, I'm totally comfortable with, if I said, that, you shouldn't do that, that's crazy. But I think encouraging, and maybe it's turning to the women in a room who aren't saying something to say, I'd love to hear your opinion because you are an expert in X or Y. We need your help. I will tell you, I think as I said, the worst thing is when people leave a meeting and not everyone has expressed themselves. So if you can encourage that, that would be great. I think also just giving opportunities. We've recognized through this Women on Boards initiative, we've recognized CEOs of companies who have added women to their board. And there's a lot of great data that women on boards actually contributes to the earnings of companies. And so companies like Remax, like IHS, there's a few others that we've recognized in the state because they've had a really strong effort to bring women on boards and just have them be part of that governance conversation. There's a lot more confidence when you're able to sit at the table with the CEO or the senior vice president of another company. You learn from that person, and it gives you confidence when you go back into this nest here. So to the extent that women might need permission or time off, I think it helps them in their own personal development. You do career development at DISH and lots of other organizations, but sometimes it's that outside experience that helps, because I always think, you don't invent the wheel right in your own organization all the time, and the best thing you can do is give people a little bit of time off to do that. When I worked at Kaiser for 12 years, 20% of my incentive compensation was based on my ability to be on boards and to be a good corporate citizen. And I had goals like that. So they were giving all of the senior executives permission to get out of the office, not come back and have to say, because some boards are early in the morning and some boards are late at night, but if you have women who've got child caring or parent caring kind of responsibilities, being flexible with them so they can do that work. It doesn't just benefit them, it benefits your company. People will recognize you as a leader when the women or men are out in the community, because you're an unofficial ambassador. So I would give them the permission to do that, work with them on schedules if you can. Sure. Thank you. Well, one thing, the first thing I did, and the governor was great because he gave me permission to do this. I always like to check in. The way that I try to manage is I don't ask permission. I make the case for why this is a good thing to do, right? And what I wanted to do was visit all 64 counties because I can't make judgments and decisions about how to change the culture or what the culture might need or how we do performance if I haven't seen it, if I haven't watched a tram. We inspect, you may not know this, but the state of Colorado inspects every chairlift and gondola and tramway at every single ski resort in the state of Colorado. So we have inspectors that are out doing that kind of work. So I went and watched them do the inspection and understood the work that they do. We refurbish, rehabilitate where we have given permission to coal companies to go down and mine, but then we want to turn the land back into something that is more consistent with our values around recreation and clean air and clean water. So I went out to 64 counties in my first year, and I did town hall meetings with employees. I listened to them and understood what some of the issues that they had, whether it was around when you're in a remote place, as you can well imagine, you feel remote. And when you're not in Denver or wherever the biggest city or the headquarters or the capital is, you feel remote. So figuring out how do we make them feel less remote. It could be moving training programs out into other geographies. It could be connecting them through videos and doing things in a way that connected them. How do we recognize the work that they do? State employees in 2017 did not get a wage increase. Why didn't they get a wage increase? Wow, the economy's roaring, there's all this money. The decision that was made, this was before I came, was, well, it would trigger Tabor, you know, we have taxpayer bill of rights law, you know, there's some I mean, it was like, had nothing to do with motivating the workforce. So when I came in, and after I started going around, and I heard from employees, we didn't get a wage increase, everybody else in the state's getting a wage increase, the economy's roaring, your revenue's roaring, there's nothing, you know, we've recovered from the recession, why didn't we do it? And so I went back to the governor and said, in our 2017, we were on a July to June fiscal year, in our 2017 budget, we need to put a wage increase in there. And let's make part of it performance-based. Even though we didn't put a lot in, we put 2.5%, but let's make part of that tied to performance. So that was another recognition. The state of Colorado works the day after Thanksgiving. Almost no one is doing anything on the day. Do you have the day after Thanksgiving off here? See? So we made people work the day after Thanksgiving. And a lot of employees were really grouchy about that. And I went back and said, let me figure out how much money, because some things we do in the state, you have to keep things open. And if you have to keep things open and you declare a holiday, you have to pay overtime to holiday pay to those people. So I went back and I said, boy, I've heard this more often than not. I can do this. I started in May of 2016. Thanksgiving was coming up. We can do this right away. We can send a nice letter to the employees, thank them. Sorry we didn't give you a wage increase last year, but we are going to recognize you by giving you the day after Thanksgiving off. We did. Part of what government thinks about is, oh God, is there going to be a newspaper story? You know, lazy state employees don't work the day after Thanksgiving. And I said, it's worth the risk. I will defend it. Most companies do it. And so we did, and the feedback we got was phenomenal. Our employees, you're videotaping this, I'm a little nervous here. Believe it or not, we did not have an intranet that employees, when I came from Kaiser, first thing I did in the morning, I turned my computer on and I got what's going on in the company. You know, what does the CEO want me to know? Is it time to fill out a form? You know, all the things that you see on an intranet. We didn't have one. We didn't have a newsletter for state employees. You know, the governor would be off in Brazil talking about economic development and trade, and there'd be an article in the newspaper. And I was now a state employee, and usually I knew what was going on, but I didn't know everything. And I thought, wow, we have 35,000 employees. They simply need to feel included in the family and understand what's going on. So I started a state newsletter. This is not rocket science. These are some of the things that we were missing. And in the newsletter, we talk about the culture and the vision and things like that. So I spend a lot of my time out of the office trying to communicate with state employees, let them know, while we don't have, you know, stock options and bonuses and things like that, that we do care about them. And the process of setting goals for each department, I mean, we have some very aspirational goals. I don't know if you know this, I'll give you one that out of our control, but we have some levers. You know, how many minutes you wait at the Department of Motor Vehicles, I've got a lot of control over that. But the suicide rate in Colorado, we happen to rank 7th. We have the 7th highest rate of suicide in the country. So we made that one of our goals. Now, what does the average state employee have to do with that? Well, actually, we have a lot of people that can influence that, who provide behavioral health services. We have hotlines. So I work with the individual agencies and talk about, well, what do you want to do? I don't dictate it. I try to understand what motivates them. And some of these, as I said, are aspirational, let's make the state a great place to live kind of goals, but some of them are much more tactical, frontline kind of goals, like nobody should wait more than 15 minutes at the DMV. So it is a big process of employee engagement, a newsletter, getting the governor out, also to town hall meetings and things like that around the state we've done in the last year. So this is sort of basic blocking and tackling that I think most businesses, large businesses in particular, have, and it's bringing some of those lessons into the state culture. So the first thing is to never say, I'm not qualified at all. because you obviously have some interest. I mean, part of being qualified is being willing to raise your hand and say, what other skills can I get? And I assume DISH allows you to take other training programs that might, let's say, you're not a finance person, but you'd love to learn, finance for dummies, or whatever you might want to call it, finance for non-finance people, so that you have some of those business skills. And you can sell that to a board. That's not my personal responsibility at the company, but I've taken a number of classes. And so I think take advantage of what DISH offers you through training and development. The other is you do something as an individual contributor. And try to think about how you can sell that. It could be marketing. So even though you're on your own, you have a brilliant, vision for how to do marketing, or you have other skills that I think you can push. The other thing is, how do you get, it's one thing to get from working to being on a board. The other is, how do you get from being an individual contributor to being in a supervisory role? And again, I think the company can help you with supervisory skills. My first job as a supervisor, I supervised 2 people. And so even that's a learning experience. And so to the extent that you can audition for roles like that where you would have a little bit more supervisory responsibility, just puts you on a step ladder to supervise, more and more and more. No, that's a great question. And actually, as you were talking, I was also thinking, even a Girl Scout troop leader is a leadership opportunity. You're motivating young women, you're thinking about how to organize things, so it isn't always about being on a board. You can take some interim steps to get to that place. In terms of your question, I think you're right. A lot of organizations do work, as I was describing, when we had to regulate marijuana, we didn't have a clue how to do it. So we had to think about, well, what are some of the issues? Pesticides is an issue. Oops, we better talk to farmers. Somebody told me the story the other day, the price of farm goods is changing because a lot of land is now being taken up by marijuana cultivators. So how does that impact our economy? So projects or new initiatives that come up where your expertise is needed, I would raise my hand and say, I want to be part of a project team. And then maybe you want to take it over, you want to be a leader of a subgroup, or you want to partner with somebody who maybe has already been appointed as the project lead. So I do think those are great opportunities. The world's changing, the world of business is changing all the time, and trying to think and maybe get a step ahead of that and then be part of those cross-departmental teams, I think is a great way to just sort of show outside of your own department. Your individual department might be really small, so there probably isn't a way straight up, and those project teams allow you to go horizontally. I'm getting a wave from my intern here, but well, thank you so much. It was great to hear from you, and I hope you enjoyed my comments. Thank you.
So much for joining us today.
Thank you.